Hello, and welcome back to my channel. I am a squirrel and I have too many hobbies. So today, this is like a knit and chat. So I'm going to be knitting on my Naimh cardigan by Emily Greene, and we are going to be chatting about one of my other hobbies, which is tarot. And I do have notes, so I might be looking at my phone while I... Okay, so we have our notes. So, first of all, I have a long relationship with tarot. I always kind of knew it was a thing, honestly, ever since I saw it in, I think, like Charmed and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, all the shows that were really popular in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I always wanted a deck, but I ended up, for various reasons, not getting one and not really studying it until I was 26. So 26 is a really transitional time in my life. I did a lot of changing, and tarot was a really big part of that growing and changing process, especially because I was processing a lot of personal, honestly, trauma and grief. So tarot became very important to me, and I have since amassed a very large collection of tarot, and I really feel strongly about reading tarot for yourself and making it part of your life and part of your day as kind of a way to like connect with yourself and a few other things. So first of all, what is a brief history of tarot? Is what we're going to call this. Because there's a lot of misconceptions about how tarot got started. And it started as a game that people were playing. Around the earliest decks that we have go to around the 15th century in northern Italy, and it quite rapidly moved up into France and kind of changed. And then around the same time in southern Germany, there was another similar game that was being played in the courts. So tarot, I'm gonna move my coffee here. It is a salted caramel latte with cinnamon, and it's delicious. So, tarot is a trick-taking game. So, like hearts or spades, but instead of having one suit designated as the trumps, it has an entire suit as the trumps, or what we now call the major arcana. And it pretty much stayed as a game in various ways. The first references we have to people using tarot for like occult or divination is really quite modern. It's in the 18th century when spiritualism and occultism was like really, really taking off. So I always tell people that it is important to have a base knowledge of tarot, because at least the history of it, so you can kind of like it helps me with my bullshit detector. If a creator is running around saying, or someone that I want to learn from is running around saying that, oh, it dates back to like ancient Egypt, which even if it did, we don't have any record of that. And also too, like, divinatory practices like aren't new. Humans have been doing it for forever. It's just whether it's this particular format of cards and using cards in general for divination. That's the part that's kind of up for debate. There's also a lot of people that will say that it was created by the Romani people through their diaspora, which happened around between the 4th and 14th century. The Romani were moving around Europe. And I do know that there are some Romani people and families, and I don't know what to call groups, families, Romani. But there's some Romani people that do use tarot for divination. And honestly, like, if they were traveling around and they found this deck, like, it's not a big stretch to say that they were using it for fortune telling, or, well, more divination, fortune telling. I'm going to make a distinction here where when I use fortune telling, I'm not using it in a derogatory sense. Like, fortune telling is very important, but for me, fortune telling is more things like you see in Asia, which it makes sense because that's where the Romani are from. So things like auspicious dates for getting married, or numbers, or knowing like the future of crops. Like, it's kind of more big picture in a way. Whereas divination, also fortune telling, you do for someone else. Like, you go to a fortune teller. It's a business. It's a trade. So you can also think of it as divination is the thing, and then fortune telling is the trade of divination. So they are both important, but we're gonna use fortune telling as like the trade aspect of it. So if I was reading for someone else, I would be a fortune teller. I'd be performing that task, that trade. I'm not paid to be a fortune teller. I read for myself and only myself. That's how I like it. So I'm going to use divinatory practice. So there are Romani groups that use tarot for both divisionary reasons and for fortune telling, for different things. But I also have understood that it was probably more likely and more common that this would have been done with coffee or tea leaves, and then tarot was kind of like picked up later. So I am not an expert. I'm not Romani. I'm not an expert on Romani. I don't try to be Romani. However, and the only reason I'm dragging the Romani into this is because a lot of people are going to claim up, down, and sideways that tarot is a Romani thing. They'll either claim it, one, to give it more legitimacy, like, ooh, it's like handed down and it's like secret. It comes from secretive people, which is also kind of gross and fetishizing, but whatever. Or they do it to almost dismiss it and say like, oh, that's something that Romani use for like scamming people generally, which is also a gross point of view. It's just gross in different ways. So I'm not here to tell you that Romani don't use tarot. I am here to tell you that according to the record that we have surviving, which of course people might have been doing stuff for sooner or later, whatever, tarot was invented in 15th century in Italy, started being used for divination in the 18th century. And certainly the way that I learned how to read tarot and the systems of tarot, like the Rider-Waite-Smith system and the other systems, those we very much know are from the 18th century, early 1900s, because we have writings. We have writings from A.E. White, from the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, from Aleister Crowley, where they do talk about these things and they're kind of explaining it in letters and different things like that. So for the purpose of this video, that's where we're going to leave the history of tarot as a whole. With more coffee. All right. So let's talk about a tarot deck. So we're going to do the anatomy of a tarot deck broadly. And then we're going to talk about kind of different styles and different systems of tarot. So, I've already mentioned it briefly about the trump suit. But nowadays, when we're talking about tarot for divination, we have a 78, sometimes more, but like the core is 78 cards, and they are split into two groups. So the first group is the major arcana. They're usually the ones that people see, like, the death card. That's major arcana. It starts with the Fool, which is number 0, and it goes through the World, which is number 21. So you have 22 cards that are 0 indexed. A lot of times you will hear the journey. You'll hear the major arcana described as like a journey that the fool goes on, sometimes called the fool's journey. I honestly really think, and this is a great way to think of the major arcana, but it also feels like this is a big influence of Joseph Campbell, who wrote the hero's journey. And Joseph Campbell is a very renowned folklorist, so kind of makes sense. And you do see a lot of the themes of the hero's journey into the fool's journey, like in the beginning of the major arcana of the fool, and then the magician, high priestess, emperor, empress, hierophant. So that's kind of like probably like the call to action part. And then, you know, you have like the hanged man and kind of these darker cards with like death and the tower. So those are, you know, your classic descent into the underworld. And then you have like the star, and then the sun, moon, and then the world. So judgment of the world. So that's like, you know, returning to the normal plane, being changed by your experience. The major arcana, when you're using them, when you're drawing cards and you're working with them, are all, you're going to think of them as being about like big things, big picture things. So like things that have a lot of reach in your life. If you work with deities, a lot of time, well, depending on the deity, a lot of time deities will reach out with the major arcana, or if you are like petitioning or working with a specific deity, you would use the major arcana for that, or at least I would in my practice. Just because it's like big stuff, and there's a lot of things that you can really dive into the major arcana, especially because in some styles of decks, the major arcanas are the only cards that are fully illustrated. So there's a lot you can kind of like sink into with them, right? Okay, so that's the majors. And then you have the rest of the cards, which are the minor arcana. So the minors are divided into 4 suits. And the suit names will change. A lot of creators, like deck creators, will change the suit names based on like the theme of the deck. But like the suit names have always kind of changed. But they seem to be pentacles or coins, swords, cups, and then wands or clubs, batons. So very similar to your standard deck of playing cards, where you have spades, clubs, hearts, diamonds, right? You can see where we're going, you know, kind of what all happened. And then in each suit, you have them numbered. All right, so each suit is labeled ace to 10. And then you have the court cards, which are page, most often, are page, knight, king, queen. Notably, the Toth deck, I think like the knight is instead of the king. I honestly don't work with the Toth style deck like ever, but I do know in the Toth deck one of the big changes is that the court cards are out of order compared to the Rider-Waite Smith. So now we're going to talk about, okay, so let me back up. So the minor arcana are kind of more about your day-to-day life things and more mundane things. And then each suit usually works with a particular element or a particular kind of realm. So for coins or pentacles, I work with that as earth. And there honestly, like there've been a few different associations with the different suits, but these are kind of the ones that are more or less agreed upon in modern tarot, and what you're going to see when you like look up videos on tarot, basically. So pentacles or coins are earth, and they are like your mundane situation, your mundane life, your physical thing. So, but they are also quite literally like money. So money and your financial status, but also like your job, right? So your job, a hobby that you do, a craft that you do, anything that you are creating that is physical and tangible, that is all going to be in the suit of pentacles. Then you have, let's do cups. Cups are pretty much always water. Through the years, there have been other decks that have associated different elements with cups, but most people, cups are water, and water is emotions. So it's emotions, but then it's also things like your emotional ties. So your friends, your family, your lover, your ex, people that you have strong emotional ties with. And that emotion can be whatever. It can be rage, it can be sorrow, it can be happiness, it can be satisfaction. All of those are in the realm of cups. And then cups will also, I find personally, that cups also come up with, in terms of mental health, but like the mood disorder side of mental health. So things like depression, explosive rage, different things like that are the mental health stuff. That's the more emotional stuff, is going to be in the cups. And now we come to swords and wands, which honestly is a 50-50 shot if what element is going to be with which. So I'm going to tell you what I use it as, and then just know that they'll be different. So I use swords as air, because swords have to do with the intellect and the mind, but also messages, social media, letters, email, news, gossip, things people tell you, like the spoken word and the written word. That is all going to be a manifestation of intellect, and so that's all going to be into the swords. And again, kind of related to cups. So mental health stuff and swords would be kind of more things like anxiety, OCD, ADHD, things that have to do with your mind racing or being fixated, and not so much your emotional state, even though they're both mental health. So then we get to wands. I view wands as fire, because I also view wands, and wands is honestly, I feel that wands is the hardest suit for people. And when I explain wands, I think you'll understand why. So wands is like a spark of creativity, of passion, an idea. That's the realm of wands. But it's very easy to look at wands and kind of say, like, well, why is that not like intellect and the mind, or why is that not like an emotion like in cups, or why is that not physical like in pentacles? But because I very much deal with wands as that like spark and fire and kind of instinctual vibe, that like fight or flight. Actually, fight or flight is a great thing for wands. Same as like questions like, are you like really engaging in, did I make a mistake in my pattern? Interesting. Hang on. This is the danger of doing this. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hmm. I honestly can't tell if I might have done a row twice, or if I just missed a pattern row. Well, let's see. Okay, no, we have our knit 2 together here. Okay, let me actually look at my pattern real quick. Okay, I think I actually did. Because I'm knitting these 2 at a time. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. I'm gonna have to figure that out later. But for right now, we're gonna finish this side. Okie dokie. So, what was I saying before I got distracted by my knitting pattern? Wands. We were talking about wands. Okay, so wands also deal with the question of, like, are you nurturing that spark inside you, or is it being extinguished for whatever reason? That's what wands are all about. So, again, I find them the hardest. I kind of view wands as like like an exclusionary, or as an energy that's like, oh well, if it's definitely not pentacles, and it's definitely not swords, and it's definitely not cups, well then it must be wands. And it is honestly the most abstract out of all of the suits, which is also why I feel like it's really good for fire. So then we have the court cards. So the court cards are at like the top of every suit, and they are surveilling the realm. They are controlling the realm, but then they also have like their own kind of sub associations, I guess. So like pages are kind of like they're new, they're learning. A lot of times they're like apprentice or childlike. And knights are all about like quick action and like being decisive. So like a knight of swords might be like firing off that subtweet like really really fast without thinking about it, whereas a knight of cups might be like, oh, we're gonna party all the time and like drink a lot, and we're gonna like feel good, and like, you know, that kind of energy. And then queens are more nurturing and guiding, and then because they have that kind of growing feminine energy, or it's more you can think of queens as like more of an expansive energy. So if you are familiar at all with Jewish Kabbalah, the first 2 worlds, the first one is loving kindness, and then the second one is severity or mercy. So the first realm or Sephiroth is like growing, and then the second one is saying like, okay, this is it, this is where we stop. And that's kind of more the energy instead of like feminine or masculine. It's expanding, growing, nurturing, or these are the boundaries, stop. And I also find that very helpful when looking at the major arcana with, you know, the emperor, empress, magician, and high priestess. That kind of way of looking at it. So now that we know a little bit about the history of the tarot and kind of anatomy of a tarot deck, let us talk about how I personally use tarot, and also what I don't use tarot for, because that's really important. So, actually, back up. So, we talked about the anatomy of so history, anatomy. Now we're going to go into styles. So, in modern day tarot, There's three styles of both decks and like systems of reading. So a lot of times people will read, like, even if they're reading a Pip deck or a Marseille deck, they're reading it in a Rider-Waite-Smith system. But we're, for simplicity's sake, because it gets very convoluted very fast, we're gonna, like, kind of talk about the decks and the styles together. So the first deck style is the oldest. It is the Pip deck, or the Marseille, Terra de Marseille, or Terra of Marseille deck. This is the deck that was created, or at least as far as we know, was created in Italy in the 15th century. There have been several different versions of it made, and it is a deck where all the major arcana are illustrated, so it's like full pictures, the trumps. And then the rest of the cards are Pip cards, so think of your normal playing deck. Like the cards that are the suits, and the out of the suits, like the numbers just have those little pips on them. So if it's 4 of diamonds, it's 4 diamonds. Whereas the face cards have faces on them, the aces. That's kind of how you want to think of the tarot, a Pip deck, as well as having the majors all illustrated. In the very earliest Marseille and Italian style decks, they didn't actually have the names of the trump cards, or the Tronifi, on them. It is thought that that is a later addition by the French, who were naming the cards in kind of different ways. I am still not sure if I missed a row somewhere along the line here. Should be really unfortunate, because, like, the point of doing... Oh, I think I did. Okay. Somehow I missed a row, so I'm going to have to rectify that. Okay. So, when we're talking about Pip decks, they are... A lot of people say they are the hardest to read, because you don't have a lot of information on each card. They tend to be very, very sparse. So if you have a spread, like if you just look at a card of like 5 cups, it's like, okay, well, what else is there? I've found that modern Pip decks tend to be a little bit more decorated, or like the Wild Unknown Tarot is a very good example of this, where it's like technically a Pip deck, but it has like more stuff in it to kind of give you hints to like the different cards. But the art has like if it's 5 of swords, it has 5 of swords very literally, whereas some other decks have more scenes. So now we're going into the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. So the Rider-Waite-Smith deck is named that, and you will often hear it as Rider-Waite or Rider, which is, not the best, because it is named Rider-Waite-Smith because it was published by the Rider Company in the 1800s, early 1800s. It was written by A.E. White, and it was illustrated by Pamela Colin Smith, and people tried to kind of erase Pamela's work in tarot, and she was very famous for both reading tarot and very famous occultist and mystic at the time. And a lot of times when people are talking about associations of cards, like talking about let me think of one, like the Lovers as having to do with like making a choice, or like the Ten of Wands has to do with like being burdened and overworked and like weighed down by all your choices. And the Ten of Cups is like happiness and contentment and joy and family. Those all come from the Rider-Waite-Smith and like that symbolism of the cards having the illustrated majors, or the illustrated majors and minors, I should say. So then we have later on, we have the Thoth deck, which was written by Aleister Crowley. It went along with his Book of Thoth books. It has a lot of more of Kabbalah, but not Jewish Kabbalah, of like this Western style of Kabbalah that was like really popular in England. And it was painted by Lady Frida Harris. And it does differ in order. Like the majors differ in order and in names, and then also, like I said before, the suits. In the suits, the court cards differ in style. And a lot of people consider the Thoth deck, again, to be more abstract and more esoteric, and therefore harder to read than the Rider-Waite-Smith. I will say most of like the reference material you will find either on the internet or in some of the books I'm going to talk about use the Rider-Waite-Smith system, more or less. And that's probably why people find it the easiest to work with and to read. One, you have a lot of imagery to sink into, and two, you have a lot of information, a lot of people talking about those decks, those systems. If you Google what does blah blah card mean, you're gonna find a Rider-Waite-Smith system, like 9 times out of 10, unless you're specifically looking for like what does blah blah card mean in the Thoth deck. Then you're gonna find some differences. Okay, so now that we've talked about history of tarot, anatomy of a deck, styles of decks, let's look at some decks that I have here next to my co-host Jackson, who you cannot see because he is sleeping. So I am very fortunate that I have a large collection of decks. I have a large collection of indie decks. And I've like, we've curated a good collection. I honestly don't buy many more tarot decks anymore because I feel like my collection's pretty solid, and I don't work with all the decks that I have now, so why would I buy more? But this is my first deck that I ever bought, and the corner of the box is messed up because my dog actually bit into it when he was alive, so I kind of like keeping the box because it reminds me of my poor sweet Pepper, who's no longer with us. But this is the Prisma Visions Tarot by James R. Eads. It uses the Rider-Waite system, but the cards aren't always Rider-Waite. Like, they're a little bit different imagery. So this is like the 4 of Swords. So you can see there's 4 swords, and there's a person, and there's like these swirly bits, so you kind of get the feeling of like air and movement. This would be an example of a major. Also, major cards in most decks that I have will tend to have a border, or they'll have like something differentiating them. So it's a sun, we have the number, we have like this really cool trippy artwork. It'll focus. And then we have like the Hermit, another one of my favorite major cards. So you can see you have a figure alone. There's a moon, but it doesn't really have a lot of the other symbols that like some of the other Rider-Waite-Smith cards have. Here's like the 2 of Pentacles, so you can see there's a person. There's the name at the bottom, and the 2 Pentacles. The other thing that's cool about this deck is all of the minors, you can put them together and they tell a story of the deck and like of that suit, which I think is pretty cool. It's a neat addition. I haven't seen it in a lot of other decks. Okay, then we're going to get to one of my favorite decks because it's just so beautiful. This is the Smoke, Ash, and Embers. This is by Stephanie Burrows and Adam Oehlers. A beautiful deck. It is very thick. The cardstock is amazing. I will say the cardstock is so thick that it's hard to shuffle. But it has dragons, and the illustration is amazing. So this is the Empress. You can see the Empress dragon, and there's some symbols, like there's the feminine, the symbol for Venus on the tree, and the scepter. Page of Pentacles with him with his little coin, and it's very bright and cheery. Here we have the Knight of Wands. You can, make a decision. Is that guy on the floor? Is that someone who's attacking the knight? Is that the knight's right? Is that the rider? Is that the knight? Who knows? So I love this deck. It has dragons. Instead of having a guidebook, it has these cards that have, I call them like the cheat sheet cards. They have, like what the card is, and then kind of 2 or 3 words that explain what the card is. So, for example, like the swords, like Ace of Swords, it's like focus, breakthrough, retreat, crossroads. Just kind of easy, quick reference. Okay. So then we're going to get into some Pip-ish decks that I really like, because those first 2 are like almost or very Rider-Waite-Smith style, both in imagery and because everything is illustrated. These 2, the Wooden Tarot and the Tronifi della Luna, are what I call like Pip. They're Pip decks. The Tronifi della Luna more so than the Wooden Tarot, which you'll see in a second. So the Tronifi della Luna is by Patrick Valenza of Deviant Moon Tarot. And it is the closest I have to a historical deck. So this is the Fool. It's also an Italian. Bagato, or the Magician. This is what you'll see in like a Tarot de Marcel's style deck. Is more this kind of imagery with the table and the dice game. And then the minors all look like this. So this is the 7 of Cups. It is literally 7 of Cups. And most Marcel decks are going to have all the pips in this kind of configuration. Which is how people read Marseille decks and read the minors. Okay, so like see. Let me find a good one. Okay, so this is the 5 of Swords in this deck, and some people say like, okay, well there's like a cage of the 2 swords, and then the sword in the middle is like breaking through. So it's like breaking through a confinement of like your mind. 5 of Swords. And then also so this is the Page of Cups, and they're also illustrated, which I love. I also love how like light the colors are, but it's kind of a darker deck. There's like some dark themes in there. And then we have the Wooden Tarot by Skullgarden. Oh. Andrew Liam Swartz of Skullgarden. These were all painted on planks of wood, which is why they're called the Wooden Tarot. And this is... I hate to call this a pip deck because it is illustrated, but the illustrations, especially on the minors, are very, very spare. This card is probably the reason why I bought this deck. The bat as the Hanged Man, like, I just love it. And then we have, what is this, 9 of stones. So I'm pretty sure stones are wands in this deck. I always have to, honestly, every time I use this deck, I have to look it up. And then it has this bonus card, which is the Happy Squirrel, which is a Simpsons reference. A lot of decks will put, like, a bonus card in there. I kind of treat it as a wild card. Some deck creators will, like, make another major arcana and, like, kind of explain it. Honestly, in this deck, the Happy Squirrel is just a wild card. Now I have one of my, like, friendliest decks. This is the Paw of Light by Zapatrax. First of all, it is all gilded and beautiful. And it is all cat themed. So this is like the 7 of snacks. Then we have the Fool. Beautifully illustrated. Ace of Claws. I love the colors. I love all the cats. Oh my god. 3 of Catnip. Like, just lovely. Love this deck so much. It is very a feel-good deck. Like, it is not a deck that I'm gonna expect a lot of hard emotions when you work with it. And then we have this deck, which I still have no idea the name of this deck. I got this from my aunt when she passed away. My uncle asked me if I wanted any of her tarot decks, and I said I would love this one. This is the back. Honestly, I feel like this is a really well-known deck. It has a lot of, like, alchemical focus, symbols and details in it. Like, it definitely has more of an esoteric feel to this deck, even though it's still, you know, illustrated. And this is very Rider-Waite-Smith imagery for the 8. I can't read. The 8 of coins. You know, this is like very Rider-Waite-Smith energy. I love this deck so much, and it connects me with my aunt, who I did not know that well. Her and my uncle got married much later in life, so didn't know her that well, but she was great. And I have her tarot deck, including this beautiful bag that I'm pretty sure she made to go with it. Love it so much. Okay, now we're going to talk about some books. Take some coffee. These are the books that I really recommend for people wanting to learn tarot reading, either for themselves or for other people. So the first one, 78 Degrees of Wisdom by Rachel Pollack. This is a classic. This is honestly, I don't care how long you've been doing tarot, how you learned it, whatever. You need to read this book. Rachel Pollack is kind of a visionary. She's been doing tarot for a very long time. This is about tarot and also kind of about her life. I love this deck. I love this book. Even if it has historical inaccuracies in it, I really don't care at this point. It is great. I've gotten so much out of this book. The next one is Modern Tarot by Michelle T. And what I like mostly about this book is that for each card, has the card, tells you about the card. Very white smithy. But then also at the end of it, she has kind of this thing's like, be the moon. So it has like different ideas of how to like work with the, not just the card, but the energy of the card. I find this really helpful in, especially in the minors, because the minors can be a little bit harder to like, they're simpler because they deal with like more like small real world things, but they can also be harder just because it's like harder to tell which one's which, and the energies can get kind of muddied in my brain. So this is really great. Queering the Tarot. I love this one, as I am hella queer. There's a lot in tarot writing about masculine and feminine and energy and blah, 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 blah. And it can feel very gendered and very gender binary and very heteronormative. So this book is must read if you are queer and you are feeling frustrated with how binary the tarot is. Is by Cassandra Snow. And it kind of can help you reframe tarot cards in a way that is more relevant to you, your life, who you're reading for. Love this. Then we have another classic, which is 21 Ways to Read Tarot Card by Mary K. Greer. Mary Greer has another OG. She has written so many great books about tarot. Honestly, I have, I think, almost all her books, but this is the one I use the most. And this is the most great for really diving into a deck and really learning tarot, because each thing she has, so she calls them steps. So, like, each steps, so, like, this is step 10 meanings. So it has the Way of the Apprentice, which is kind of like the easy version with an activity. And then there's the Way of the Adept, which has more kind of in depth and different levels. There's a bunch of there's activities for everything. This is a really great book. It's a really good way. There's just a lot of information in here that you can use with every single tarot deck, and also ways that you can really steep yourself in tarot and learn it, how cards interact with each other. Love this book. It is great. I honestly reread it. Like, if I'm in a tarot slump, I will sometimes like go through and like pick a way to read tarot, like one of her steps, and do that for like a week for all the cards that I pull. Okay, let me kind of unbury my knitting. Sorry, Jackson. So I have my cat sitting next to me. You can't see him, but he's there. Okay, so now we're gonna get into nitty gritty. So, how I use tarot and why. But let's start with what I don't use tarot for. And I feel like this is kind of a main disclaimer, but I do not use tarot to answer any legal, medical, or financial questions. If it comes up for myself, I kind of just like jot it down as like a, hey, ask doctor about X, like next time you see them, especially for like mental health stuff. But like, I would never have a spread for someone, look at it and say like, oh, you've been depressed lately. Even if that's like what my thought is, like, I'm never gonna say that. I'm never gonna ask the cards like, does so-and-so have cancer? Not gonna do that. Absolutely not. Those kind of questions really need to be dealt with professionals in those fields, for better or worse. It just is what it is. If you're trying to like use tarot to tell you what stocks to buy, no, I mean, if you can afford to buy stocks and you want to use tarot to tell you what stocks to buy, go for it. I would recommend a financial advisor, but that's just me. I also do not use tarot to communicate with the Fae. That is mostly because I don't work with the Fae. I have no desire to work with the Fae. The Fae scare me. All respect. So I stay far, 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 far away from them. And therefore, I don't use tarot to connect with them. I also, honestly, that dragon deck is like the most Fae-like deck I have. There are tarot decks out there that have a lot of fairies and fairy art. They're beautiful. And just no, that's a step too far for me. I also do not use tarot to explicitly contact the dead or dead family members. If they want to get a hold of me, they got my number. They can get a hold of me other ways. I'm like, even when I use like my dead aunt's deck, I'm never asking her specifically for guidance or advice. If they're there, they're there. If they're not, they're not. It is what it is. So, what do I use tarot for? Lots and lots of things. The main way I use tarot is a way to like process my own emotions. I like to pull cards when I cannot really put words to what I'm feeling, or either like shuffle and pull a card randomly from the deck, or sometimes I'll like go through the deck and I'll think about like the meanings of the cards, and I'll pull a card that I feel most matches like what I'm feeling. And that's really great. Again, like before I go and talk to like a therapist or something, sometimes I've like already done some work to be like, this is how I'm feeling in a more concrete way, because I really struggle with processing emotions, and especially those really big emotions that the major arcana deal with. Another way I use tarot is a way to connect with deities, but also kind of like movements of time, so celebrating holidays, birthdays, stuff like that. Sometimes if I'm doing a spell for a particular purpose, I will pull a card that aligns with the purpose of the spell and have it out to kind of focus my intention and add some like oomph. Same thing, like if I'm petitioning a deity for a particular thing, I might pull a card that relates to that. Again, for like extra explaining, extra oomph. As a way to like have the card up and kind of remind myself of like what I've asked for and what to look out for. The biggest way, and the way I started to use tarot and the way I recommend using tarot, is either at the beginning of the day or the end of the day. You're gonna get a journal, or like, it doesn't have to be fancy. It can be your phone, it can be a post-it note, it can be Instagram, it can just be a file of photos, and you're going to pull a card, and you're either gonna like snap a picture or like write down what that card is and then journal about it. And not even so like as much as like what the card actually means. You can certainly do that. There are some days where I pulled a card, I've stared at it, I pulled out the note, like the book the guide that it comes with, and I've just like jotted down like 3 or 4 words from the guide that stuck out to me. I pulled a tarot card and like written a story about like what's happening in the card. I'll pull 3 cards and write a story about that. I'll pull 2 cards and write about how card A impacts card B. And it's just like a good way to kind of get my thoughts and emotions out, and a good way to like use tarot in a way that's very freeform and like not super restrictive. I'm not very precious about it. And especially when you're reading for yourself and when you're starting to read for yourself, like don't be too caught up on the actual meanings and the actual meanings. Like, you know, like the book meanings that people will ascribe to it, either on the Rider-Waite or the Thoth or the Marseille system. Because the more you work with the cards and the more you kind of develop your own associations for what they mean, like the stronger of a reader you're going to be. A lot of times people will call this intuitive tarot reading, which is kind of silly. Because all divination and fortune telling and magic in general involves intuition, and anyone who tells you differently is trying to sell you something, honestly. Because you do have to trust yourself, and that's another thing that tarot is really good for, especially if you're using it as part of your magical journey or your spiritual journey, is it does kind of build your trust with yourself. So, like, look at a card and have a gut reaction and be like, oh, dope, I know exactly what that card is saying. Or, oh my goodness, that card, I pulled something and it really relates to like what's going on in my life right now. So that's always the way I like tell people to start with tarot reading, and then eventually, like, if you want to and you want to do like spreads or spells or whatever, there's so many other books of like tarot spreads and spells and stuff that you can do. Internet is great for having like different spreads where like each position is asking a question and then it's like answering it. So that can also add like layers of meaning and insight into your card reading. And then once you get further along, you can start to do things like you can start to mix. Like you can mix like tarot reading and like rune casting. You can or charm casting. Or you can have a tarot deck and an oracle deck and maybe a Lenormand deck that like all work together and kind of attack your question from different angles. Again, I have found tarot to be really helpful in my life, in my growth as a person and as a witch and as a like just kind of a creative outlet. It can be as serious or as unserious as you really want it to be. You know, it started out as a game, but I feel like over the years people really resonated it and started using it for divination. And I honestly think that's pretty cool and kind of an insight into how people relate to like different icons and things and symbolisms that appear in cards. So, if you would like to know more about tarot that I have not covered, either my personal practice, my personal history, or whatever, you can leave a question in the comments for, all 10 people who are watching this. Other than that, I'm so happy that y'all hung out with me and listened to me ramble about tarot kind of incoherently and work on my knitting with me. And if you're wondering if I ever did figure out what I did not figure it out, but it seemed like this side was ahead by a couple rows. And you're not going to be able to see it. Curse of Dark Yarn. This, by the way, is The Man Who Opened the Door by Treehouse Knits? Treehouse Knits? I think that's the name. I say like I don't have it right next. Okay. Oh yeah. Treehouse Knits. The Man Who Opened a Door on the Yak Silk fingering base, which is superwash merino, silk, and yak. It is beautiful and squishy. The colors, which, I don't think you're not going to be able to see. It just shows up as dark. It's like a brown. It's different shades of brown and gray, all mixed together. I think it looks like the floor of the forest in the winter. So, like when you're walking through the woods in the winter and it hasn't snowed yet, but it's really cold. So like all the all of the soil is like brown and kind of gray, and the trees are kind of gray. That's what it reminds me of. I really love it. As my goal in life to just look like I'm going to disappear into a forest at like any point in time. Which, you know, I live in Florida. We do have a lot of forests and a lot of swamps. And that's also why I'm knitting and fingering weight, because my fingering weight sweaters and my lightweight sweaters get like so much more wear, which are my more bulky weight sweaters. Anyway, so thank you for hanging out with me with this like knit and chat. If you are following along my whip journey, it's just this kind of a part of, because like I've been yapping for an hour and I have gotten some like good knitting done. So yeah, that's kind of the goal of these videos, is to, one, talk about some of my other hobbies, and to get some work done on my whips. So for my like year-long working on my whips project, I'm probably going to have another video out hopefully in the middle of January, kind of showing my progress, and then at the end of January kind of check in with those like twice a month, and then do these like twice a month. So thank you so much. I hope you all have a great day, and I will see you in a week or two. Bye.